Tonight on Capitol Journal, the legislature is on spring break, but will return on Tuesday. We'll go over what to expect when the session resumes next week. The race for Senate is heating up in Alabama. I'll sit down with candidates Mike Durant and Britt to learn more about their campaigns with the election 60 days away. It's all next on Capitol Journal. From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. It is legislative spring break this week. The legislature typically takes a week off at this point during the session to allow lawmakers and staff to rest and recalibrate for the final stretch of the session. That stretch begins on Tuesday, when the House and Senate will reconvene for the 24th legislative day. There are 7 legislative days remaining in the session, which will be spread out over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Plenty of bills still await action in the House and Senate, some that may make it over the finish line and others that may not. Capitol Journal's Karen Goldsmith takes a look at the unfinished business that awaits lawmakers upon their return.
The Legislative Services Agency says more than 1,000 bills and resolutions have been introduced this session, but only 156 have received final passage. With only 7 days left in the 2022 legislative session, hundreds of bills will be vying for lawmakers and the governor's attention. In the Alabama Senate, an education bill by Senator Del Marsh would put up to $5,700 education tax dollars in the hands of parents so that parents can educate their children how they see fit.
And what is Senate Bill 140? Senate Bill 140 is a parent's choice bill. It sets up student savings account that allows a parent at their decision, if they wish to move those dollars to another public school, a parochial school, a private school, wherever they think they have the best chance of getting their child educated.
This is his answer to low-performing public schools.
So my question gets to be is, how can we be putting more money than ever, third in the Southeast in what we put in the classroom, and yet we're last in the country in mathematics and 46 in reading. And in the last 5 years alone, our average ACT score has fallen 1.5 points.
On February 2nd, the plan narrowly passed the Senate Education Policy Committee on a 5-3 vote. That did not include 2 senators who did not vote on the plan. The bill is now before a study group, which typically means it's dead, at least for that session. On the other hand, a bill by Senator Bobby Singleton is awaiting the governor's review and signature. State inmates who complete trade programs may soon be able to participate in a small business development program as they approach release.
This gives them a greater opportunity to be able to go out and, versus somebody filling out an application and saying, I want to come to work for you. We'll help those people get through that process also, but we also more so want to help them write a good business plan, teach them how to get a license and to be able to be business owners and taxpayers.
What's the likelihood of the governor signing this measure?
The governor and the executive branch supports this bill. They're 100% behind this bill. So we see it as part of prison and criminal justice reform here also.
Lawmakers return from spring break on Tuesday, March 29th. For Capitol Journal, I'm Karen Goldsmith.
There are a number of education issues still looming in the session. The House on Tuesday is scheduled to take up Senate Bill 220 from Senator Arthur Orr, dubbed the Alabama Numeracy Act. The bill aims to improve the state's lagging math scores by targeting more resources to struggling schools, deploying math coaches to help teachers, and holding schools accountable for continued failure to improve. The bill is second on the House agenda for Tuesday. Also awaiting a vote in the House is a bill from Senator Roger Smitherman delaying the retention provision of the Alabama Literacy Act by 2 years. Under current law, third grade students who cannot read proficiently would not be promoted to the 4th grade starting this year. There are exceptions and programs to help struggling readers catch up over the summer in time to be promoted. Smitherman has argued for delaying that holdback provision by 2 years due to school closures during the COVID-19 pandemic. Governor Kay Ivey last year vetoed Smitherman's bill, doing just that. But now the governor says she would support a one-year delay. Senate Bill 200 has passed the Senate, is awaiting a vote in the House, but it remains to be seen if lawmakers in the lower chamber will try to amend the bill. A recent poll showed a majority of Republican voters oppose a delay. And the Education Trust Fund is still awaiting action in the Senate. The $8.1 billion budget funds the range of education services from pre-K to higher education. This year's spending plan represents a more than $500 million increase over the current year's budget and will be the most money ever allocated for education in the state's history. The budget includes a 4% pay raise for teachers and other education workers. That same raise was extended to community college workers as well. It includes targeted funding for programs aimed at improving student achievement, with first-class pre-K and the Alabama Reading Initiative being among them. More than $20 million would go toward a new program intended to improve math instruction in lower grades. The budget also includes new investments in workforce development. With so many bills left to pass, sometimes there can be tension between the two chambers in the final days. House Speaker Mac McCutcheon said the House and Senate leadership have been working together on a plan to make sure important work gets done down the stretch.
The Senate leadership and House leadership has worked very well together from day one, and we have accomplished a lot. I mean, you'd stop to look. Here we are with 7 days left in the session, and we've already got conference committees set up on the general fund, and the education budget is going well in the Senate. So we're working very good together, and we're moving good together. But members work very hard. They've got their bills, and when you get into those last couple of weeks of a session, they want to know, where's my bill? Does it have a chance? How much time do we have left? Is the Senate, doing their part? The Senate wants to know, is the House doing its part? And these are normal discussions that we need to have.
The Speaker also addressed the issue of gambling. There are now two competing bills, one in the Senate that allows for a lottery, expanded casino gambling, and sports betting, then another in the House that only allows for a lottery. Both bills face long odds with so little time remaining, yet the Speaker says he could see a vote coming in the House.
We're going to have to see. We're going to have some meetings when we come back from spring break. What we want members to do is to look at the piece of legislation that was passed out of committee, talk to their districts and talk with members, and let's see exactly what the feel of the caucuses are when we come back, and see how many votes are there to see if it's something that we can move, because there again, with just a couple of weeks left, we're in crunch time here. Plus, you've got the issue in the Senate, and we're going to have to be working with Senate sponsors up there to see how they feel about it, because right now the Senate bill is working towards maybe a gaming commission with limited facilities versus just a lottery in the House. So we're on two different tracks, so we're just going to have to see.
On to politics. There is new polling revealing the state of play in some of Alabama's key races. The poll, conducted by Signal on behalf of Alabama Daily News and Gray Television, surveyed 600 likely Republican voters and carried a margin for error of plus or minus 4%. We'll start in the race for governor. Incumbent Kay Ivey enjoys a strong approval rating. 66% say they approve of the way Ivey is handling her job as governor, compared to 21% who say they disapprove. Those numbers represent improvements for Ivey since the same poll was taken in August. When asked who they would vote for if the election was held today, 46% said they'd choose Kay Ivey, while 12.4% said Tim James and 10.4% said Lindy Blanchard. A full 21% remain undecided. Ivey would need 50% plus 1 to avoid a runoff. And there's movement in the hotly contested Senate race. The poll showed Mike Durant leading among Republican voters with 34%, while Katie Britt is in a close second at 28%. The big story, however, is Mo Brooks, who is the choice of just 16% of voters. The same poll in August showed him far out in front with more than 40%. That's a 24-point slide. 24 hours after that poll was released, former President Donald Trump announced that he was rescinding his endorsement of Brooks. Trump said he is looking to endorse one of the other candidates. So what is that endorsement really worth? The Signal poll says maybe not as much as it used to be. When asked whether Trump's endorsement would make them more or less likely to support a candidate, 39% of Alabama Republicans said they'd be more likely to support a Trump-backed candidate. That's less than 42% who say it makes no difference, plus 14% say they'd be less likely to support a Trump-backed candidate. That more likely number has dropped by almost 20 points since the same poll was taken in August. I'm pleased to have both those leading candidates, Mike Durant and Katie Britt, in our Capitol Journal studio this week. We'll have those interviews later in the show, as well as analysis on these polling numbers from John Rogers, a pollster with Signal. We already had Congressman Brooks on the show a few weeks ago, and we will be looking to have the Democratic candidates on for future shows. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capitol Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capitol Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capitol Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capitol Journal.
Next, I'm pleased to be joined by John Rogers, a pollster for Signal, the firm that conducted the poll of Alabama voters earlier this week. John, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Todd, great to join you.
Let's start with the governor's race. Your polling numbers in the governor's race, you did approval rating for Governor Ivey herself, but also the ballot test, her on the ballot versus these primary opponents that are challenging her. Well, what did you make of these results?
Well, Governor Ivey continues to have strong approval ratings with Republican primary voters in the state of Alabama. In fact, her image has improved from the late fall, and her share of the ballot has also gone up. So she's in a good position currently, but she is not quite at that 50% mark, which is sort of the magic mark, obviously, to avoid a runoff.
Yeah, and I find these numbers interesting. I mean, 46% of Republican voters say they would choose Kay Ivey if the election was held today. 12.4% say Tim James. 10.4% say Lindy Blanchard, and there's some other folks down the ballot that with single digits. But 21% say they still remain undecided. Now, back when we polled in August, that was 33%, or almost 34% that were undecided. So that more people are making up their minds when it comes to this governor's race. So were you surprised to see Governor Ivey gain a share of that electorate, even though these other challengers have entered the race?
I don't think so, Todd. I think that people give her a good bit of credit for handling a really tough situation. Obviously, when she came into office, it was sort of a dark cloud over the governor's office. And I think that people appreciate the steady hand that she's had, on the ship of state, as she likes to say. And so it will be interesting to see where those undecided voters go. And I think a lot of that will be determined by, how much money some of the other candidates, especially Tim James, want to try to put in the race.
Right, 21%. I mean, that's a pretty good chunk of the electorate. She's sitting at 46. So you could say that really she needs a little less than a fifth of those remaining voters to get that 50% over the hump. Do you think the others have a chance in this race?
I think they have a chance, but she is certainly in a very strong position. People know her, they like her, And her support is especially high with voters who are seniors. She's at 52% on the ballot with voters over the age of 70. So that's those older voters are going to be very likely to turn out in a Republican primary election. We see that in Alabama and across the country, that in primary elections, generally the electorate tends to be a little bit older than it is in a general election. And so the fact that Governor Ivey is so strong with those voters, those senior voters, really, I think is a good harbinger for her chances at avoiding a runoff. But I mean, it certainly could go a runoff, but she's in I think a pretty good position to catch, as you said, a fifth of those voters who remain undecided.
Moving on to the Senate race, these numbers show Mike Durant now leading with 34%, Katie Britt just behind there at 28%. But the real story is Mo Brooks, who is down to 16% after he was leading this race by 20 points in August. What happened?
Well, I think that there are several things you could say, but the first has just got to be the rise of Mike Durant, right? And so Mike Durant has a very compelling biography as the Black Hawk Down pilot, and but politically speaking, in some ways, he was sort of an unknown. I think really to almost most of the voters in the state of Alabama up until the last 3 or 4 months. But he's got a great biography. It's connected very well with voters, and and he's put a good bit of money in the race, and they've run a good campaign. And when you're looking at the voters that he is getting, a lot of those voters tend to be more Trump first Republicans. One of the questions that we asked in the survey was, do you consider yourself to be a Trump Republican or a traditional conservative Republican? And 52% of Republican voters in Alabama said that they're Trump Republicans first, versus 41% who say that they're traditional conservative Republicans. And Durant is getting a plurality, more of those Trump Republican voters than any other person in the race at the moment.
Now, there are 60 days to go from now until this primary election. And if it was right now, we would be headed to a runoff, right, between Mike Durant and Katie Britt. This survey has Durant in a hypothetical runoff, winning that runoff against Britt. But there's a lot of time left. Does she have time to catch up?
I think that she does. We're 2 months away from the actual primary election, and then you have the runoff, which would be beyond that. And in our hypothetical situation, Durant is ahead of Katie Britt in a runoff, but Durant is not getting 50% in that runoff scenario. And so I think that points to the fact that there is still time for voters still don't know exactly who Mike Durant is. Same for Katie Britt, I think. And so there's still plenty of opportunity for a lot of voters across the state to get to know both of those candidates more than maybe Mo Brooks, who's been in the public eye longer than either Durant or Britt. I will say too, Todd, that it's interesting to note that in South Alabama, there's more undecided voters in the Senate ballot than in the rest of the state. And so about a quarter of the electorate in the Mobile area is undecided. And so that could have, I think, a huge effect as we enter the last 2 months of the election.
We've got about a minute left. This poll was pretty consequential. 24 hours after these Senate numbers were released, former President Donald Trump rescinded his endorsement of Mo Brooks. He's saying he might endorse one of the other candidates, Britt and Durant, who I'm actually interviewing for this program. I know you tested the potency of Trump's endorsement. How decisive would that be for Britt or Durant going forward in this race?
It would certainly be very, very helpful to whichever candidate Trump endorses, if he chooses to endorse. But it would not be a slam dunk ensuring that candidate wins. When we asked that figure, we found that only 39% of Republican voters in Alabama said that they are more likely to vote for the candidate that President Trump endorses, and somewhere around 40 to 45%. 42% said that it would make no difference, that Trump's endorsement of a candidate would make no difference to how they vote in the Senate election. So I think what you're going to see is the voters of Alabama, the Republicans in Alabama, they're going to make up their mind. But certainly if you're Britt or if you're Durant, you're going to be competing hard to try to secure that endorsement.
John Rogers of Signal polling firm based in Washington, D.C., thanks so much for coming on the program and explaining some of these poll results.
Thank you, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm pleased to be joined by Mike Durant, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. Mike, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
My pleasure.
By now, most everyone knows about your story, being captured in Somalia, shot down as part of that Black Hawk Down ordeal. You're also a successful businessman in the defense industry there in Huntsville. Walk me through why you want to be a United States Senator.
Well, people have been talking to me about this for a long time. When something like Somalia happens to you, I've spoken in front of crowds for 30 years now. People want to hear the story. They want to hear it from me. So oftentimes people would say, you should run for office. And I'm not a big fan of politics. I don't really like it. I had always said, I don't like the politics of business. I'm pretty sure I will despise the politics of politics. But to me, that's exactly why people like me should get into politics, because we're not politically motivated. And by that, I mean, we're not going to change our story from day to day because, we're going to just fly with the political winds. We are who we are. We know what we stand for. We have life experiences. I believe this is what the founding fathers envisioned. This is someone who's had a military career, a business career, raised a family, and is at the right point in their life to go and represent the state. And that's what I want to do.
Conventional wisdom these days says it's good to be the outsider in the race, and you're certainly running like that. Tommy Tuberville used that to his advantage.
Right.
The other side of that is that your opponents have longer records, of being involved in conservative issues, for a long time. So how do you, without that kind of record to run on, convince movement conservatives of your bona fides?
Well, if people thought the status quo was working, they wouldn't be so interested in the outsiders. Most people believe the system is broken, and it's broken because of people who are career politicians. And the only thing career politicians tend to focus on is getting reelected. And for outsiders, that's not really our concern. Obviously, we want to get elected because we're running, but our motivation is not to get reelected. It's to go up there, make a difference for the people we represent, and then go back home, just the way the founding fathers envisioned it.
Are there issues specific to Alabama that you want to address as a senator in Washington?
Well, yeah, absolutely there are issues. Voting integrity is, if not at the top of the list, very near the top of the list, because the things that happened in 2020 cannot happen again. We were robbed of what I believe should have been, President Trump's second term, and we can't let that happen again. So we've got to fix that. The wall, we have to finish it. I met with President Trump earlier this week, and he basically reiterated what we all know. It was almost done. The materials are sitting there. We could finish that job. It's one of those things that can be done rather easily if we just put the focus back on it and get it done, because you can't deny there are drugs coming across the border. There are thousands and thousands of illegal aliens that, based on what you read, cost the taxpayers in this country $1 billion a year to provide services for, because we don't know who they are, but yet they still get the services. I think second is, in that list is energy independence. How important is that? When you think about inflation, which is hitting everyone today, energy independence is a big driver of all that, because it's, it drives shipping costs, it drives a lot of the cost of materials to build some of the things that we buy, and it hits lower income people more than anyone else. They're the people who have to make a decision between putting gas in their tank or doing something else. I'd hate to think there's situations where they don't buy food, but it's probably the case. So, energy independence is critical. We can solve two things there. That is, our dependency on foreign countries that obviously we can't rely on, but also have a positive impact on inflation. And then also on the list is strong defense. That's such an easy sell in Alabama because, well, first of all, I'm a veteran and I know how you can't just decide tomorrow that you want a strong defense. You have to maintain a strong defense. And for us here in this state, there's a huge aerospace and defense economic impact. So, it's a very personal thing for me, but also from a state perspective, it's beneficial to all of us. And then there's almost 500,000 veterans living in Alabama. So being a veteran, caring about veterans, and being willing to take veterans issues to Washington, I think are all things that I'm very passionate about.
I want to ask you about that election fraud that you're saying, because you've used this word a couple of times. You say Trump was robbed. Well, that could mean different things. It could mean like, well, I was robbed of my strikeout. They got robbed in the tournament. Or do you mean that he was literally, like the election was literally stolen from him?
So, I mean, there was an injustice, I guess, because I agree with you. I mean, it's somewhat, there are some semantics here. But the bottom line is, I don't think Joe Biden won the election. And the reason I don't think that.
Well, yeah, I was about to say, what are you basing that on?
Well, changing the rules. When you suddenly make voting by mail easier than showing up in person, I mean, that just begs for fraud. I mean, you can't deny that. That's why most voters on both sides believe that voter ID is appropriate, because we want everyone to be able to vote, but they're supposed to be a legal citizen to vote. And if you can't identify who's voting, or you don't even know that they are the ones who filled out the ballot, how could you possibly argue that that is a valid vote? So, that's the easiest one. In Pennsylvania, they extended the due date. Just all these things, changing the rules to basically help Joe Biden. And then the final one that's come out just in the last few days is Hunter Biden's laptop. That came out before the election. People who voted for Joe Biden, the report that I read, 17% said they would have changed their vote if they'd have thought that whole story was real. And it got buried, and now it comes back to light as, oh, it was real, but now the election's over. So all those things together, I think, really cheated us as a nation out of who should be in the office right now and is not, and we're paying a heavy price for it.
But doesn't Trump deserve some of that blame? Because I understand your point about changing the rules. That happened most everywhere.
Right.
Take Florida, for example. They took advantage of it. Republicans in Florida took advantage of voting by mail, owned voting by mail, and Trump ran away with that state, as opposed to Georgia and Pennsylvania, where he told voters, Republicans, don't vote by mail. So doesn't he deserve some of the credit for the losses there?
Well, I guess if you make that argument, I suppose so. The thing about it is Florida is probably going to go red no matter what. So it isn't really a swing state, at least not in this day and time. Whereas Ohio, Pennsylvania, some of those key swing states, I mean, that's where the outcome of that election was determined. And unfortunately, those rule changes favored the Democrats.
Yeah. Back to Donald Trump. You mentioned that you met with him. The big news this week is that he has rescinded his endorsement of Mo Brooks in this race. You met with him in Mar-a-Lago this week. I suppose you were seeking an endorsement?
I was, and also just to let him know who I am and what I stand for. And he respects veterans. He respects our military. I mean, one of the things he said in the meeting was, the fact that I'm an outsider. He himself said, well, you're like me. And business experience, bringing that knowledge to this role is critical. That's what's missing. You have people in Washington that don't understand the implications of the things that they're asked to vote on. But if you've signed the front of a paycheck and made cash flow happen and run a business and understand how all these decisions truly affect our military and businesses, you're in a better position to cast the right votes.
The former president does seem to have this really outsized influence, not just in this race, but maybe Republican politics in general. There's this new polling that's out measuring basically the potency of Trump's endorsement. Would it make you more or less likely to support whatever candidate he endorsed? And it's diminished. From August, it was 57% said it made it more likely a Trump endorsement made it more likely they would support a candidate. That's down to 39. 42% say it makes no difference. 14% say it makes them less likely to support a candidate. So my question is, are we spending too much time worrying about what the former president of the United States thinks about this race?
I don't think so. I mean, polls are polls. They're gonna swing one way or the other. I mean, his support matters. There's no way you can argue that his support matters. And I am honored just to have the opportunity to meet with him, and I really appreciated his time and his perspective. And if he were to endorse me, that to me would be a game changer for my campaign.
Let's talk about if you got elected. Some hypotheticals on, if you get elected on election day, now you're a United States Senator, what happens? I know Republicans are trying to take back the Senate, but we don't know what those majorities are going to look like. We do know that Joe Biden will still be president for at least 2 more years. And we know that no matter who's in the majority, the Senate will be pretty evenly divided. So I wanted to ask you, how would you be able to work with Democrats and the administration once elected on big issues like inflation, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not naive enough to not think this is an overwhelming task. I mean, you're looking at people across the aisle who fundamentally view the world, the country, what matters to us as a people differently. I mean, profoundly differently. And all I could say is, I've dealt with this in business. I've dealt with this in the military. You got to somehow get them to come to you. We don't need to go to them, because what they're pushing is not good for the country. I mean, there's no question about it. I often, ponder the question, why? I truly don't understand what that agenda is all about. I mean, if you're the most pessimistic of people, you would say they want to destroy the country. I mean, there's evidence that appears that some of them do. So how do you work with someone like that? First of all, you got to stand your ground. I mean, you have to identify who you are, what you represent. Republicans, pretty clear: smaller government, lower taxes, strong defense, Constitution, get it all back to that. That's our non-negotiable stuff. I'd hate to think there are things that matter to the Republican voter that you would negotiate on. And, all I could say is I would never do that, but somehow got to find a way to pull them to the middle ground while not compromising on the things that matter to us most.
You've mentioned your support for term limits.
Mm-hmm.
If elected, how many terms would you limit yourself to?
So I signed a pledge already. For the Senate, I think 2 terms is adequate. Again, it goes back to the Founding Fathers. What did they have in mind? They wanted citizens to get up there, make a difference, and go back home to their farms or whatever it was that they were doing. And I think that is a big part of the solution to what's wrong with Washington, because if all you're thinking about is how do I get elected next time, you're probably not making the right decisions for the people that you represent today. And that's what this is all about. Making the right decisions for the people you represent today, not about what's good for your career, your campaign, but what's right for the state and what's right for the country.
You have experience in the Huntsville defense industry, obviously, and just the Huntsville area in general. And so you understand Senator Shelby's impact there. I mean, Redstone, NASA, FBI coming to town. And, much of that has been made possible because he was in the Senate for 25 years, mm-hmm. earning that seniority. Mm-hmm. So my question is, by limiting yourself to only 2 terms, do you put yourself at a disadvantage from earning that seniority and being able to do some of those things? Well,
we need term limits across the board, because if you can get term limits across the board, and everybody says it'll never happen. Well, the only way it will happen is if you grandfather everyone in who's already there. I think it could be a popular enough issue where we could get it done. Hard to say. But it is, I believe, the root of the problem. So let's just hypothetically say you get term limits put in place. That changes the whole system. Now, no one's there for 25 years, so it isn't the person who just hung around the longest that gets these critical appointments and committees. It's the most qualified. It's based on merit, which is how it should work. It shouldn't be just, you've been here forever, so you get the job. That's not in the best interest of the people of Alabama or the country.
Let's talk about Ukraine. I'm really eager to have your input on this as a combat pilot, as someone who has seen war. Seems like most Republicans and Democrats agree on one thing, and that's to not send troops to Ukraine. And yet Republicans also criticize President Biden, say he's not doing enough, he's weak, things like that. So my question is, what should we be doing? Is it more arms? Is it the no-fly zone? What should we be doing in Ukraine differently?
Well, the reason President Biden is viewed as weak is he is weak, and he proved that going back to Afghanistan. I mean, actually, it's every foreign policy decision he's come down on in 40 years. He's been on the wrong side. I don't know of a single exception, and some of his peers have put that in writing. So, he's the worst decision we could have made for president. And, you can't stand up and say, well, a small incursion would be okay. I mean, he said that. How can you have any credibility if you say things like that? You have to say, no, the buck stops here. You cross this line, these are the consequences. And they're clear. They're not, well, it's going to be the worst thing you've ever seen. That's meaningless. You have to have some sort of cause and effect. And he's been chasing, he's been swinging late for the pitch, I think somebody said the other day, to me, which I thought was a very appropriate way to look at it. He's reactionary, not proactive. He's been reactive, and he has no credibility, and that's what has hurt us. But to the main part of your question, whatever the Ukrainians are asking for, we should do, short of enforcing a no-fly zone or putting boots on the ground. Whatever other weapons, we should be facilitating them getting the MiGs. There's no reason we're not doing that. They can fly them. I mean, one of the things I caution people on is you can't send them things they don't know how to use or they don't know how to support or maintain, but they have these platforms. So we should be figuring out how to get those to them. There's all sorts of different ways. Have them go to Poland and fly the aircraft in themselves. That's not escalating this any more than it already is. And they're about to turn the tide on this potentially. I mean, they have fought hard. They are committed to their country. We should all be proud of the fight that they are levying on the Russians. The Russians have performed pitifully. This is an opportunity to really, really knock the Russians down several pegs in the world order. And by helping the Ukrainians, not only do we protect their sovereignty, but we also help us strategically because, if Russia's relevance is marginalized, that's very, very significant for us. Not just against the Russians, but the Chinese are watching all this too, and they're going to question, do we really want to make a bold move like this against Taiwan and end up in the same situation?
Real quick, I wanted to ask you, speaking of the polling, most of these recent polls have you as the front runner, right? I mean, Mo Brooks has lost support. Now you're kind of in the catbird seat. That also means you probably have a target on your back. You saw how a lot of these groups came after him and attacked him. Are you prepared to run as a front runner knowing these attacks might come your way?
Well, I am a front runner, and I was the front runner before the president pulled his endorsement, so I'm probably even more out front now. And it is unfortunate that we have to endure this, and it's the reason why a lot of good people don't get into politics, because it's tough. People told me when I was originally contemplating this, I'm more worried about my family. I've been through a lot. I'm not going to like it, but it's not going to discourage me. I'm more worried about my family because, they care about me, I care about them, and a lot of it's not true. In fact, most of it's not true once it all starts happening from what I've seen. So it's going to be difficult on them, but all I can do is, show them how to endure this, knowing that we're doing this. When I say we, I mean me and my family are doing this for the right thing, for the right reason. There's no personal gain here. It's all about trying to send somebody to Washington that the people want to support, an outsider, non-career politician who cares about the state and cares about the country.
Well, we're out of time, but I really want to thank you for coming on Capitol Journal.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Next, I'm pleased to be joined by Katie Britt, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. Katie, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Hey, thank you so much, and congratulations on the anchor chair. Yeah. Excited to see you in this position.
It's been a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot. Really eager to talk about this Senate race.
Absolutely.
It's really heating up. A lot of viewers probably have seen your billboards. They've seen your campaign ads. But I was hoping that you could introduce yourself to our viewers in a more personal way and say why that you're running for Senate.
Oh, yes. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. So I am born and raised in the state of Alabama. And ironically, I am the only candidate that can say that. I love this state. So we have spent the first few months of the campaign visiting every single county across the state. So all 67 counties, listening to people and getting to know them. And what I have learned is the very values that I grew up with in Coffee County are the very values that everyone across this state holds dear. And that's that the most important things in life are faith, family, and freedom. And so knowing that and knowing that we need to fight for those in DC, my husband and I wish you were here, my husband is a bit of a giant. He's 6'8", 320, so he's hard to miss. He played football at Alabama and then the New England Patriots, and he has graciously quit his job for us to do this. And that's because we both believe there is too much at stake not to. We look at our children, so we have two beautiful children in 6th and 7th grade, and we don't recognize the country. And we believe if good people don't get off the sideline and go fight for the nation we know and love and fight for our state, I want Alabama to be a place my kids want to raise their kids. And we feel like if we don't do that, we're not sure what's going to be left for them. So being a mama and a wife is so important to me. So if I'm not on the campaign trail, I am usually at the volleyball court or taken to basketball or doing something fun like that.
Are there any issues specific to Alabama that you want to address as a senator in Washington?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first, my priorities in D.C. will be, number one, make sure that we have election security and integrity, pushing back on H.R. 1 and S1. Sealing and securing our border is of paramount importance. Finish building the wall, put back in Trump's Remain in Mexico policy and public charge. Those things were working, and Biden has come in, and the implications of that have been tremendous for our state. What we are seeing is an increase in human trafficking. We're seeing an increase in drugs. There has been said that it's enough fentanyl coming from China to Mexico across our border that it can kill every single American 4 times over. And we are seeing that firsthand here in Alabama. You continue on balancing our budget is of paramount importance because the debt and deficit that we are creating is putting on the backs of our children and it's going on the backs of their children. So making sure that we balance that budget and rein in spending is so important. But all of these things we must do, and we must also make sure that Alabama has a seat at the table. And that's what I want to do as your next United States Senator. We have the best state. I'm a little biased, but I think we live in a great state with great people, and we have a great story to tell. We have some challenges as a state that we need to hit head on if we ever want to reach our full potential. I am a big believer that no child zip code should determine their opportunity. And so if we are going to make that a reality, we're going to have to be honest about these things, and we're going to have a true partner on the federal level to work with local, state, and federal leaders to hit things head on. And that's stuff like mental health. So we rank 46th in the nation when it comes to access to mental health treatment. And there is no sheriff, no probate judge, no hospital administrator, and really most days no teacher that doesn't tell me that's the number one issue they deal with every single day. You look at opioid use, and unfortunately for us in our state in 2018, we wrote more prescriptions for opioids than any other state in the nation. So for every 100 people, we wrote 97.5 prescriptions. You look at these things, you look at broadband. We know if we want 21st century jobs and a 21st century economy, we've got to have 21st century infrastructure. Our state legislature has made great strides in these areas, but I want to be a partner to make sure that we meet the needs of children and hardworking Alabamians across the state.
You know the Senate well. You've worked up there before, including being the chief of staff to Senator Shelby when he was chairman of the Appropriations Committee. So some pretty high level stuff. And that probably gives you an advantage in terms of actually serving as a senator. But we're in an election, and that could be a disadvantage in terms of being labeled as an insider on the campaign trail. How do you manage that?
Well, it was an honor to serve our senior senator as chief of staff for 2.5 years. It gave me a front row seat to the challenges and opportunities of this state. Got to work to recruit industry, to create good paying jobs for hardworking Alabamians. I got to learn about the state, everything from our deep water port and the uniqueness of having 5 Class 1 rails right there, and what we can do not just for the area of Mobile, but for this entire state. Looking at the Google data center and coming into Scottsboro and being a part of these conversations, knowing what the military means not only to Alabama, but what Alabama means to military and national defense. Working on projects, both working to bring the F-35 here to Montgomery and working on Redstone Arsenal as we continue to expand and opportunity for our military and FBI and national security. I have gotten to be a part of a lot of those conversations. I am going to hit the ground running. I'm going to be effective on day one as your next United States Senator. And I am excited to take all of the good things, in research and development that happens here between Hudson Alpha and Southern Research and UAB, among so many other things, and help take those things to the next level so that we can really create opportunity for Alabamians, because ultimately it is about preserving this nation that we know and love and making sure that Alabama has a seat at the table.
The big news this week is that former President Trump has rescinded his endorsement of Mo Brooks in this race and is looking to potentially making a new endorsement. I understand that you recently met with the former president. Are you seeking his endorsement?
Yes, so I had the opportunity to sit down with him. Wesley and I did. It was a great conversation. He and Wesley got to catch up a little bit about the Super Bowl and things like that. And we got to update him on the race. We got to tell him about our grassroots campaign. I mean, Todd, nobody is outworking us, and I believe the people of Alabama are worth it. I mean, we are getting up every day, and we'll be in Marshall County one day, Baldwin County the next, Sumter County the next, Blount County the next, Jefferson County the next, and you know, that's just 1 week. So we told him about the schedule we're keeping, about how we're working hard to earn the support of Alabamians across this state. We've been talking about the America First agenda. People miss him all across the state, and we had an opportunity to talk about that. Also talk about the record number of people investing in this campaign from Alabama. People want new blood. They want fresh blood. They want someone who will go fight for our values and fight for their people. And that message is resonating, and it was incredible to be able to give that to him, and certainly hope to earn his support as well.
Well, it seems to me Trump might be having an outsized influence, not just in this race, but in Republican politics in general. You know, there was a poll recently showing that really the potency of that Trump endorsement has declined over the last several months. Voters said, 39% said a Trump endorsement makes it more likely they'd support a candidate that has his endorsement. That's down 18 points since August. 42% say it makes no difference. 14% say it makes them less likely to vote for that person. So my question is, are we spending too much time worrying about what the former president of the United States thinks about this race?
No, he is the leader of the party. People miss the president. They know how effective the president was. I mean, look at his policies. Look at the America First agenda. If you just rewind where we were during his presidency and where we are now, everyone knows we are weaker and more vulnerable under Joe Biden. You look at what was happening on the border. We were actually getting movement, sealing and securing that border. You look at holding China accountable and what President Trump did there. I mean, you look at his policies across the board. Go to the grocery store, buy a gallon of milk under President Trump, and then buy one under President Biden. And that shows you he had the people of America that he was putting first. The people of Alabama know that. They miss him, and they're eager for those policies and that influence to return.
Let's talk about election fraud. You mentioned that as a top priority in terms of what you would focus on in the Senate. President Trump and certain folks on the right, they've convinced a lot of people out there that the 2020 election was stolen, just outright stolen, illegal votes, all these things. But isn't that dangerous? I mean, isn't that what led to folks storming the Capitol on January 6th?
No, if you look back, election integrity, fraud, and abuse has been rampant for years across this nation. You go back to the Baker report in 2005, the Baker Commission report, where they highlighted that. And unfortunately, we have career politicians in D.C. that didn't do anything about it. You look at 2016 and what the Democrats said about it being stolen and Russian interference, or that would have been Hillary's election. You look at 2020. It is clear that we must have free, fair, and secure elections. People have to have faith that their vote counts. You know, I have said from the beginning, we have to get to the bottom of 2020 so that people can have that confidence. If you have this kind of crack in the democracy, which we do, and it goes all the way back, it'll ultimately be what causes this nation to crumble. And I think elections are so important. It's one of the most important things you do, and we need to give people confidence that their vote counts and that the process is fair.
Mm-hmm. Well, I understand that. That's a point well taken. But, a lot of this, these theories about how the election was apparently stolen, which, by the way, Trump's own attorney general looked into this and said there's nothing there. But a lot of it comes down to these COVID election policies, these changes.
That's right.
We had them here in Alabama. Some of them, we extended the primary, if you remember. Mm-hmm. A lot of early voting, mail-in ballots, things like that. States like Pennsylvania, Georgia. But I remember the election. I remember states like Florida taking the new rules and really taking advantage of them. President Trump or the Republicans down there take advantage of mail-in voting. They really own it, and therefore, Trump dominates Florida. The opposite happened in Georgia and Pennsylvania, where Trump said, "Don't vote by mail and don't take advantage of these new rules." So my point is, as much as he's spinning all this election fraud stuff up, doesn't he deserve some of the blame for losses in Georgia and Pennsylvania that lost him the presidency?
No, the people who are to blame are people who actually changed the rules outside the scope of what was legally there. So we saw it happen in a number of areas where, you had people circumvent the legislature to create new rules, and we have to be a nation of laws. And then we saw Nancy Pelosi come in and then try to cement those things. You saw HR 1 and S1 and, kind of make sure that kind of do away with voter ID, which I think is incredibly important that we have an ID to vote. I think it's one of the most important things you do, and I think it protects your vote. It would allow for ballot harvesting across this nation. It would also take your taxpayer dollars, and there was a time where it was saying that we're going to send them to people that you didn't agree with. Also, redrawing lines from a federal perspective. It was a federal power grab from the liberal left. It is important that our states control these elections and that we make sure that they're free and fair. I am a big believer in voter ID, and I think we need to do everything possible to make sure that everyone has an ID so that they have that, they can exercise their right to vote. I believe it's the least of these. Once you start allowing for ballot harvesting where people will be going door to door, asking for that ballot and telling them how to check it off, we've got to protect that for each and every person so they have that right and have that right for their voice to be heard.
Let's talk about if you get elected. Say, you're elected senator, you go up there to Washington. I know that Republicans are trying to take back the Senate, but we don't know what that majority is going to look like. We do know that Joe Biden will still be president, at least for another 2 years, and that the Senate will be pretty evenly divided. How will you be able to work with Democrats and the administration given that scenario on big issues like inflation, like the border?
Yeah, I think we have to stand tall and speak directly to the people. So I believe we'll take the House, Republicans will, and the Senate, and we have to balance the budget. You think about what you have to do, what I have to do, what every business across America has to do. We have to balance our budget. The federal government should be held to that same standard. On day one, I am going to introduce a balanced budget amendment, and to that, I'm going to tie that if we don't balance our budget, then nobody should get paid. And I think at that point, people may start to pay attention. But it's things like spending, it's things like creating a conversation around the border about what's happening, as we mentioned earlier, in our state. Whether it's increased crime or human trafficking or drugs that are coming over that border, talking about it in a way that makes it tangible to people so that we can actually get real results. We've also seen what weakness can invite, and I think it's important we kind of sort of look at all of this, that we become energy independent. We're going to have to fight for that tooth and nail. Make sure that way we can drive our gas prices back down, but we know that energy affects the price of everything. So opening up that sector and making sure that America can stand on its own 2 feet and that we really start to show strength in a number of areas will be a priority and will be something we'll have to speak directly to the people about and make happen.
Let me ask you about Ukraine. Obviously, there's a war going on there right now. It seems to me that a lot of Republicans and Democrats agree on one thing, and that's that we shouldn't send troops to Ukraine.
Right.
But Republicans also come after that and criticize Biden for not doing enough. They say he's weak. What is he supposed to do? What are we supposed to be doing differently in Ukraine? Is it arms? Is it a no-fly zone? What's Biden supposed to do?
Yeah, not a no-fly zone. I'm with you on your comments here about no boots on the ground. I do think it's important to kind of take a step back and realize how we get here when we're talking about weakness. Obviously, you can make no excuse for Putin's aggression, that he is a thug, he is evil, and there is no excuse for it. You look at Biden, though, and you look at what he did in this country. President Trump had worked so diligently to make us energy independent, to open up these energy sectors. Biden comes in day one and cuts off the Keystone pipeline. He then, gives Putin exactly what he wants with removing sanctions on the Nord Stream 2. Then we have the hack of the Colonial Pipeline, of which Biden responds with, giving him a list of things that he hopes that he didn't touch. That's not real leadership. Then he has an extension of the New START treaty under Obama's terms. That's not good for America. So when you give them the keys in that way, you give Putin everything that he wants, and then you also put us in a weaker position with regards to energy and our dependency, that's not good. Then you look at what happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan. And make no mistake about it, the weakness that we showed in that withdrawal of Afghanistan, I mean, I hope we can all agree we wanted our men and women to come home, but we wanted it done the right way. You know, never did I think I'd see an American president get on bended knee to the Taliban, allowing them to dictate how and why and when we would leave. You know, leaving Americans behind enemy lines, leaving Christian missionaries behind enemy lines, not keeping our word to our allies. When you do that, you embolden the enemy and you undermine our credibility across the globe. And that is exactly what we are seeing play out today. And make no mistake, an emboldened Russia is an emboldened China, is an emboldened Iran. And we have to have real leadership from the White House. We have to project strength. I mean, we saw that. You know, Reagan preached that, peace through strength. Trump practiced that, and that's what we need to get back on good footing.
Well, we're out of time, but I really appreciate you coming on the program. Katie Britt, candidate for United States Senate.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org.
Senator, statesman, and U.S. Vice President William Rufus King of Dallas County served in the U.S. Senate for more than 30 years. In 1852, King was elected vice president on the ticket with Franklin Pierce. While recovering from illness in Cuba, King became the only member of the U.S. executive branch to ever have been sworn into office on foreign soil. He passed away less than a month after being inaugurated.
And that's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll be back to our regular programming Monday with nightly coverage from the legislative session. That's 10:30 p.m. here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.